being hero is a punishment. And yes, it may sound harsh, even provocative. From childhood, we are taught to look up to heroes, be like them. Even sometimes some of us in late night thoughts dream of doing something heroic, something just unthinkable for ordinary life. We dream about standing out in society, at work, in the family. But do we ever ask what becoming a hero actually costs? And why do we need heroes at all? We tend to think heroism is a reward for an exceptional act, but what if this reward is nothing but a punishment, much like a criminal receives for stepping outside the norm? What if, at root, these two extremes are much closer than they look? Let's take this step by step and start with a simple question. Who do we call a hero at all? One definition says that this is a person who sacrifices themselves for the public good. So basically it means sacrificing the only thing you have, yourself, for the good of other people, especially strangers. In other words, someone who does something just abnormal, something an ordinary person can't or won't do. That's why we single them out, that's why we see them as exceptional. The key thing is exactly that, exceptionality. We set them apart from ourselves, so do we turn them into a kind of outsider, marginal? That may sound counterintuitive. We're used to thinking of marginals as people unlucky enough to end up at the very social bottom. We often feel pity or disgust towards them. A hero, we assume, has nothing to do with it. But in fact, like the other outsiders, the hero is ejected from normality by their actions. We sacralize them, say everyone should follow their example, we shower them with medals and gratitude. But why? Maybe to keep them from being ordinary, from blending back into the crowd and everyday life. And it doesn't always look bad. An outsider's life can look perfectly successful from the outside. A marginal figure may even be praised as a national treasure, but the hate or depths to which society leads them or cuts them down shows only this: it wants to separate them from itself. Society is intolerant of broken norms, it punishes violators, each in a different way. Some with the status of a sacred cow, some with a psychiatric hospital, some with prison, some with cold street. Cross that thin, cultural, specific line, and you're temporarily or forever lose the privilege of being ordinary, of being the crowd, of living a normal life. Yes, we should call it a privilege. Once you become an insider turned outsider in the eyes of the majority, you become a threat. History gives many examples of why being a minority can be dangerous. Those who differ too much are often treated like criminals, enemies of society. Whenever we see something extraordinary, we want to underline it, whether it's heroism or a crime. And often, these two categories like to trade places. Yesterday's heroes become villains. Today's heroes will become tomorrow's villains. Why do we cast people who seem genuinely good into hell and pull out those we only recently called devils? Okay, let's take an example. Imagine a person named Tommy. Tommy is an ordinary guy from an ordinary family. It's the 16th century. His family lives on the coast of some random European country. He loves the sea and can't live without it. He decides to connect his life with big water and travel on it. Step by step, he rises from the very bottom and becomes the captain of his own ship. But the rumors spread about unknown lands across the ocean. Tommy is intrigued. He wants to take the risk, even knowing many never return. It's a dangerous choice, and he takes it. He finds new islands, new continents, new terrain, charts them, returns home where he is hailed as a hero, met with festivals and praise. Sacrificing himself, he makes a great contribution to the common good, opening routes for his country's new acquisitions. After his death, there are monuments, lands and schools named in his honor. And yes, he may have killed several natives during those journeys. And yes, he could have taken the locals into slavery. He may have also brought deadly unknown diseases to people, defenseless against them. He may have condemned those territories to new wars and new suffering. But look at the 16th century. No one actually gave a fuck. Everyone was doing exactly that. it was just the norm. The Renaissance didn't mean you couldn't kill and seize territory, it meant only you could do it more elegantly and maybe in more progressive and effective way. Now, back to the present. It's 2025. Everything has changed. Many now see Tommy as a villain and his action as criminal. Fewer and fewer people consider him hero. More and more see him as one of the evils of the past. Monuments come down. His name is just erased from public spaces. What seemed carved in stone for centuries in one moment just wasn't. In just a few years that eternity was flipped. And it must be said that it is very difficult to get out of this trap. For a hero or a criminal, it's easier to become the opposite than to become ordinary, normal. Today you're a war hero, tomorrow you're a war criminal. Today you save lives, tomorrow you just help the enemy. Today you're an enlightener, tomorrow a deceitful propagandist. Either way, you're excluded from the mass, you're a marginal figure cut off from shared normality. In an instant, you can become a violator of an unwritten law, the one who shatters the crowd's comforting homogeneity. This is neither good nor bad, it's just one of the phenomena of our daily life, which can be very different. There is no single set of informal rules of conduct. Normality is a set of thousands, millions of private ideas about how the people around me should live. Where some of those ideas overlap, we form a fuzzy common sense of the basic rules. These rules also aren't good or bad in themselves. Yes, sometimes they're suffocating. I know it firsthand. This channel only exists because I can't find like-minded people in my own country. But at the same time, we must pay tribute to these often irrational rules. Sometimes they simply make our world predictable, easy, stable. Every society has its own order and its own boundaries, but as soon as you cross them, you can be made a marginal. And you never know which one. This is a common case when in one place for the same act you're paraded into Hall of Fame, in another you're marched in chains. Same act, different society, different verdict. So crime and heroism end up always on two sides of the same coin. Every generation picks that coin up and flips it again and again, deciding who gets a medal or statue and who gets a sentence or oblivion. In both cases, the person becomes marginal, pushed to the edge, singled out from everyone else. It doesn't matter how the coin lands, the marginal remains a marginal. They remain what the tide of society has washed ashore, a product and a concentrate of what they were torn from. That's why marginals, like heroes and criminals, are useful to look at when you want to understand, really understand what your or other society is. They show what a society truly values or fears, what needs to be isolated and expelled from the norm. It's as we were ancient Greek priests, we divine from the entrails of marginal figures, criminals or heroes, from their remains mutilated by society, we can glimpse both the distant and the immediate future. In both cases, we see a transgression of social norms and some form of self-sacrifice or selflessness. As Wikipedia says in definition of a hero, selfless acts for the common good. But it would be fair to add selfless acts for the common evil as well, because they do things that allow society to understand what both extremes are. Heroes and criminals are equally violators and are in essence phenomena of the same type. Different moral labors, same basic pattern. This may feel cruel or fair, the only thing that doesn't change is our appetite to keep doing it. But the real question is why? Why do marginals exist? Like I said before, we can single them out, praise them, love them, and punish them for the exact same thing. Because they do what most of us fear, either what we are afraid to do or what we are afraid to become. The fear of taking a life sits right next to the fear of stepping in to save that life. And yet, the ones who take life are often, maybe too often, also called heroes. With a criminal, our reactions are familiar: fear, anger, anxiety. With a hero, we reach for pride and respect, sometimes even humility. But there's fear too. You might ask, why be afraid of someone who did something profoundly good, such a hero? Because excess unsettles. Too much good can feel contradictory, like overeating chocolate, euphoria first, fullness and tiredness after. What truly troubles us is the extreme. A hero, just by existing, questions our norms, makes us think that they could or should change. Admiration mixes with apprehension. A hero stops being a safe object of respect when their difference won't stay pinned to a medal as a lucky exception, and starts to look like a demand on everyone else. Then we treat it as a routine, and we risk letting it become a new normal we are not ready for. Take a simple case, rescuing someone from a burning building. If it isn't marketed as exceptional, if it's waved off as ordinary, we start to feel it's just everyday. Anyone can do it, nothing special, like holding a door. So now it's expected of everyone. Of course, out of the instinct of self-preservation, it is very unlikely that will become a universal routine. But if you think about this radical example and imagine what would happen, such a society wouldn't last long. When risk doesn't support the functioning of society, it simply destroys it. In a prehistoric tribe, most members constantly do the unthinkable for a modern person: defend, hunt, save lives, because without it, they wouldn't survive. Today, the same behavior isn't necessary, it turns destructive. And when we don't contain such cases, when we let normality just drift toward dangerous practices, we feel threatened and try to separate that hero or that criminal from ourselves. That's why we so often hear complaints when someone who did something heroic gets no award, no thanks. Society, among other things, functions as a system for detecting strangers. We tend to spot foreign bodies in the society and isolate them with an immune response of gratitude, flowers, medals, but we will come back to this a little later. And now we need to talk about the hero as a role model. Yes, heroes often carry the ideals and desires of many people. People see in them the selves they never became and reach for them as their future selves. To be someone's dream, one you most likely can't fully match, is a burden. It can be tiring, nagging, even unbearable. There is no single role model of a particular hero. There are only different interpretations of that person's image, and they can be very different. So how can one become a hero if everyone's idea of what a hero is different? Is that status even achievable? You can study heroes, memorize their deeds, wait for your moment, but chance and the system still decide everything. In real time, you can't know whether helping a sick person yourself was wise or whether waiting for an ambulance was better. If I hit someone, am I savior, a vigilante, or just a thug? This uncertainty sometimes just freezes people in critical moments. We hesitate, unsure whether our departure from normality will be labeled heroic, criminal, or simply foolish. If heroism could be copied like Elvis' jumpsuit, it would be turned into a joke. And yet, isn't that what we often see? A hero is a label we cannot claim for ourselves. It is a social role that can only be assigned by others. It appears when the system fails and someone steps into the gap. The criminal, in a different way, points to the same gap by using and exposing it. A one marginal figure exploits a hole in society. Another shows the system can't fix it and puts themselves at risk to close it. Only later do we decide whether the gap was real, whether there was a crime, and whether the way it was filled counts as heroic. If a country faces a deep economic crisis, does seizing the wealth of the rich count as heroism? If it faces a political crisis, is revolution heroism? If someone kills a robber, is that heroic? The answers don't live in the moment, they arrive after, with society's judgment, a judgment that never really ends. We like to think of our heroes as role models, but that image is often out of reach, not because heroes are superhuman, but because of the how title is given. A hero is crowned by many, public opinion, the state, institutions. It's a bestowed status, not something you can copy. Each case is tied to place, time, and the mood of society. What once counted as heroic, for example, going to war, may not be seen that way today. If you try to replicate someone's exceptional status, you risk becoming not a hero, but a cringe-worthy imitation, or even a criminal. We don't become potential killers by watching violent films. If someone kills, we assume that something inside was already there, and then it got triggered. Same with heroism. Seeing a heroic act doesn't make you a potential hero. There has to be an inner foundation that meets the right moment and the right society. Heroes and criminals frame what we call the natural. One from above, one from below, and between them lies the grey normality. A spectrum in which you can swim for a long time until you accidentally swim beyond the boundaries. There are two extremes. The system keeps at the edges, so the center feels stable. They show what ordinary people are not supposed to be. We digest them by assigning roles, praising or condemning, and then setting them apart. That's how most of us learn what normal looks like. Every society protects its own viable model of normality. Break it and you either force the system to change for better or for worse, or push it toward total collapse. Marginal marks the borders, one above, one below. A lot of this is handled by institutions. We imprison criminals, keep them under control, we send firefighters into burning buildings. For a firefighter, a fire is still dangerous, but it's also a job. Training, teamwork, a clear mandate. The fire service and similar institutions are heroic domains of the mass. They hold the collective right to bestow that quality. Here lies the difference. The heroic firefighter is first of all the system or a part of it, a collective body, not a freestanding individual like a hero. There is no singular heroic firefighter or nurse in isolation. Suit, helmet, mask are part of the status. These bodies shield the majority from the chaos of the extremes. They don't live on the same plane as the mass. They demand nothing unnatural from it, and so they don't disturb its peace. If Jesus were the savior of normality, he might say something like, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and keep our own normality for us." These institutions protect the normal majority from destructive extremes, letting the system survive by sparing the mass from behavior that is foreign to it. What truly unnerves us is the person who looks like us but acts outside the unwritten rules. That's why nonconformity feels threatening in conservative communities. Simply by existing, the nonconformist raises some troubling questions inside conformist minds. If they can live that way, why don't we? Why should we live the way we live if it's not the only possible and correct way? Admiration of a hero and condemnation of a criminal share one hidden line. The admirer or the condemning is saying, "I couldn't do that" about the hero, or "I wouldn't dare" about the criminal. The criminal frightens because he presents a possible ideal that most fear to face. Killing for gain declares that the strong can take from the weak or just from unlucky one. The hero frightens for another reason. He demands an individual who denies the mass by his individuality and at the same time sacrifices, even harms himself for that mass. He's frightening because he offers, almost forces, the majority to accept a model of conduct. The model that is deeply unrealistic and dangerous for the mass. Although, of course, sometimes the old normal is simply fighting for survival, resisting new trends and norms. The beneficiaries of the old order will always cling to it as long as it brings profit. To better understand how this works, we can imagine the crowd as an immune system, searching for cancer cells that threaten to create a state within a state, a norm inside the norm. Crimes like robbery, murder, assault, when they aren't sanctioned by a culture or an ideology, tears the fabric of a community. The same do extreme acts of heroism. If most people routinely used violence or routinely run into mortal danger to save children, society would collapse. Both patterns are unsustainable. Society tracks down deviations and tries to isolate them. We, as part of the system, spot unsustainable, cancerous growth and try to neutralize them through condemnation or glorification. Yet, if they get carried away and start reproducing criminals or heroes en masse, then, like cancer cells, they cease to be an anomaly and become an alternative order, bound to clash with the old system. This is a confrontation between the old and the new natural. To survive, the system must reset its baseline, nudge both models toward a workable middle, shrink the number of criminals and heroes, and let a new everyday life form around that center. If the system can't do that, if it labels too many people as villains or saints, it breaks its own immune response. When violators are almost as common as citizens, the question of what counts as natural becomes impossible to answer, and the society fractures. That's why you can't turn everyone into a hero. There's the frame around the picture. Thicken the frame too much and it stops framing. It becomes the picture. At that point, these patterns either force a viable new normal, or they just pull society apart. Heroes, criminals, and other marginals are people who, like anyone, deserve empathy and compassion. Each of them finds their own way out of normality. You don't have to love them, just as you don't have to love any ordinary person. They're vivid samples of the DNA of a vast organism, one that would be harder to read otherwise. By looking at them, we can draw conclusions about the society we live in. By understanding the complexity and duality of their position, we can step away from ideology and get to actually helping them, of course, if help is needed. We can move beyond mass regulations and processes that are indifferent to individuals, but I also don't want to canonize outsiders, which is all too easy when you're looking at a supposedly oppressed side. They suffer, Yes, but when they can, they also use their position without thinking about others' well-being. People are still people. Some get lucky enough to be the oppressor, others are unlucky enough to be the oppressed, and when the chance presents itself, the one who has known the horrors of being oppressed gladly takes their oppressor's place and oppressors them in turn. I'd like to live in a world where these roles are never needed, where sacrifice for others and harm to others for oneself are never required. Yet, that wish could become another grim dystopia, where the familiar tragedy of life and death turns into something even worse. So, we can try to make at least this dystopia a little better by understanding it. Thanks for watching. This is the first video on this channel. I hope you heard something interesting and new for yourself. Tell me what you think. I'm genuinely curious. There aren't many opportunities in my life to hear criticism and feedback. If you'd like to read the original essay, follow what I'm doing, or just talk, you can follow me on Patreon for free. A community of like-minded people sounds good, so you can help me bring it to life.